phone clearly, and that way our folks who are participating virtually can hear and participate in our deliberations. Trustee Day, would you please convene the Committee on Finance?
Thank you, Chair Monville. Good afternoon. I'd like to call the Committee on Finance to order. We have 6 public speakers this afternoon. Each will have 3 minutes to address the board. If I could please ask everyone to use the allotted time. In order: Christian Torres, Christina Rayleigh, Gloria Juarez, Jennifer Egan, Lillian Tays, and Kevin Ware. I'm going to push the button on the, there you go.
All right, hello, I'm Christian Torres. I'm a student at Cal State LA, and I'm here representing Students for Quality Education. Our voices are one. To the California Faculty Association, we the students of the California State University stand in solidarity with our faculty as a fight for 5, because we understand that faculty teaching conditions are student learning conditions. More profoundly, we understand that both students and faculty are seen as exploitable and marginal actors before the Board of Trustees as we struggle to reclaim and democratize the CSU system. For this reason, we ask the CSU faculty to support us, our students, as we push forward with our campaign for free, quality public education in the state of California. We ask faculty and the CFA to reject any and every proposal put forward by the BOT that would increase fees and tuition on students and cutbacks to our education. The state of California has the 7th largest economy in the world, with the CSU system being the state's largest employer. We know that the CSU budget has increased over the last year, and we students, faculty, and staff also know from firsthand experience that this money has not been distributed fairly or democratically. In fact, within the first year of increasing the CSU budget, the BOT voted to increase executive salaries by 2% and lifted the administrative salary cap, whilst denying hard-working faculty a modest 5% increase. It should be noted that the majority of the members of the BOT make upwards of $200,000, with Chancellor Timothy White making more than the President of the United States. The problem at the CSU is not lack of funding, but lack of priorities. Neither faculty nor students are priorities in the eyes of the BOT, much less the quality of the education that is being administered in the classroom. We understand that in an age of neoliberal policies that have weakened unions, privatized social goods, and have led to consistent cutbacks in education, to demand a free, quality public education might be viewed as radical, but we believe it is just. Article 26 of the United Nations Charter declares everyone has the right to education. It is time that we assert this right united. And to the Black and African American brothers and sisters of the CSU, the assault on your community and your rights to self-determination has persisted since the first person was stolen from the shores of Africa. That assault continues to be perpetrated today by many, if not most, of America's institutions. The CSU is one of those systems. Access to education has consistently been denied to peoples of African descent since the beginning of the chattel slavery in America. Indeed, the status quo has always feared an educated Black and African American population. This denial continues to this day, and the CSU system is one of those purveyors. The last 30 years has witnessed a dramatic decrease in the Black and African American student population throughout the CSU system, as well as the University of California system. Was the Black and African American prison population has increased dramatically. The United States now accounts for 25% of the world's prison population, the majority of which are of African descent. The end of affirmative action, cutbacks to education, and the rise of the prison industrial complex in the state of California have all contributed to this decrease. Furthermore, the lack of diverse faculty and consistent increases in tuition and fees have only served to disenfranchise and marginalize students of African descent. And to our fellow cohorts and comrades of the CSU, we, the students, have been consistently patronized by the BOT for our belief that education is a human right, and therefore it should be free and accessible to all those who pursue it. We have been consistently belittled by those in power for believing that those in power do not see us as humans, but as commodities, customers, and consumers to be exploited. We have been kept out of the decision-making process and forced to accept policies that we do not agree with and that do not promote student success by any means. Cutbacks to our education and increase in tuition and fees do not promote student success. They hinder our progress and it burdens our load. Any cutbacks and proposed tuition fee increases should be viewed as an assault and affront to our livelihoods, our dignity, and our right to determine our future. We call upon our cohorts and our comrades, our classmates, to begin a mass mobilization for a student strike to demonstrate not only to the BOT, but the rest of the nation that we students have the potential to build true political power.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Gloria Juarez, and I'm a student at Dominguez Hills, and I'm speaking on behalf of the students of quality education. Today, I will be talking about the tuition increase. Tuition increase has limited my ability to obtain the necessary materials for the courses I am taking with the little money I have left over from financial aid. I personally don't work because I am a full-time student, but those who do work about 3 different part-time jobs. Plus, they have their own responsibilities. Tuition increase hinders our learning experience by depriving us of money for utensils, basic living conditions, and transportation. I believe that education is a human right, and everybody should be entitled to it. Thank you.
Hi, I am speaking on behalf of the students of the CSU, and we'd like to present the award of Privatizer of the Year to Timothy White for your effort in increasing student debt and keeping public universities at private school costs. Thank you.
Yeah, I called them. They got the names.
Hi, Jennifer Egan here, and thank you, students. These comments are about the sustainability report. I have a lot to say about it, so I'll speak quickly. But I want to make the point of my comments very clear. Let's not capitulate to bad ideas that hurt our students, even though people in power think they're a good idea. This document charts the course for the CSU to capitulate to forces which would undermine our mission to provide quality higher education to CSU-eligible students of California. It reinforces the status quo instead of laying out a call to action to save quality public higher education. It leaves me with the question, what exactly are we trying to sustain? There are several troubling points in the report, and I will address only a few. First, the report suggests that expensive technological toys will enhance our graduation rates. Such toys, as we've seen in the past, have limited usefulness, especially for our students who are the least acquainted with the university. Would you really rather go shopping for glamorous gadgets that promise more than they can deliver, rather than financially support the employees that you have already invested in, though insufficiently? This is a waste of human capital. Why ignore all the research that proves that student success comes from interaction with their faculty members? It's disrespectful to the faculty and staff who work with students day to day, and it's disrespectful to students who deserve quality education and access to real experts. Second, if access is important, what about funding enrollment? That seems to be absent from this report. Instead, this report seems to wish away students who are qualified to attend the CSU, but for reasons beyond their control need developmental work in English and math. This is a waste of potential human capital. I know that even some of the authors of this report are opposed to unrealistic four-year graduation rates for our students who work, and instead of having financial support coming from their family, instead have children of their own to take care of. That said, once again, let's not capitulate to bad ideas that hurt our students, even when they are posited by people in power. Let's not capitulate to a No Child Left Behind styled model, one that invests in students who need us the least and disadvantages the students who will be amazing. We've seen it over and over again with just a little more investment in their potential. Faculty on the campuses and on the statewide academic senate have worked for years on improving remediation for CSU-eligible students and increasing graduation rates. It seems like a bad idea to create a task force that will give you a different answer than the faculty have been giving you for the last 10 years. What helps remediation, what improves graduation rates are high impact practices where faculty are working with students in intensive environments and small classes. I don't think another task force is going to give you a different answer. And if it has your faculty on it, it won't. Please stop asking for another study that tries to get you to a different answer than the obvious one that the faculty have already given you. What might real sustainability of the CSU and its core mission look like? I would suggest that a real sustainability report would prioritize the academic mission, figure out how to support people who are actually working with students, in part by bargaining first before going to the legislature for funds, and would define real student success as the result of investing in the human capital in your employees. Thank you.
Kevin Weir, Sociology, CSU Sacramento. This sustainability report, note the air quote symbolizing irony, is a self-fulfilling prophecy. The report's definition of sustainability accepts the premise that because state funding in higher education has gone down in the past, that it will inevitably continue to go down, eventually perhaps to zero. This report acknowledges that public-private partnerships are risky, and yet it advocates for them anyway, without protections. The faculty are concerned about public-private partnerships because they may compromise our curriculum, our research, our academic freedom, and the rights to our own intellectual property, not to mention the overall threat to our ability to provide high-quality public higher education. These deals have the potential to make the CSU system an empty vessel for private interests. In the future, will we see the Chevron curriculum on environmental ethics? Or maybe the Pearson course on teacher credentialing? It would be truly criminal to take money from corporations that would subvert the mission of the university as a real educational and scholarly space, especially when many of these same corporations routinely dodge their tax responsibilities, which should go to help fill the state coffers and to fund the CSU in the correct manner, by the people and for the people. The faculty, staff, and students are here to defend public higher education, not as a curriculum that has been compromised by private interests and warped by people who are not scholars in their field. Indeed, changing the education code so that the CSU can have more discretionary power is frightening, given the CSU's track record of discretionary spending. This is an audacious recommendation, as evidenced by the obscene buildup of reserves while faculty and staff wages have been stagnant. We incur more transparency about funding for the campuses, as well as real transparency that this report hints at, but doesn't spell out in any substantial manner. The CSU administration further needs to stop crying about pension and benefits liability. In 2015, instructional salaries and benefits for faculty are at an all-time low of 31%. That must be due to your oft-touted other spending priorities that we hear so much about. It is time that the Board of Trustees examined their budget as a moral document, one that should put core mission of instruction at the center, keep tuition as low as possible to ensure access to the people of California, and pay faculty a decent wage that allows us to fulfill this core mission.
Good afternoon, Lillian Tays. There are a number of reasons that CFA strongly opposes the sustainability report's recommendation that this board adopt a tuition model that implements annual tuition increases tied to the rate of inflation. Many of you are new to this board and so have not been here long enough to realize that student fee increases opposed over the past 15 years have already far outstripped inflation. Adding these proposed fees year after year on top of the huge increases already imposed since 2000 would be unfair to CSU students and counterproductive to the CSU's mission of access and affordability. Moreover, we have not missed the irony inherent in the tuition proposal in the context of bargaining. The task force stresses the need for the university to maintain its purchasing power, but dismisses it when applied to faculty. The loss of purchasing power is one of our arguments against management's 2% salary proposal. While the administration wants to bolster its own future purchasing power through automatic increases imposed on our students, they are unmoved by the fact that over the past decade, faculty have already lost purchasing power, averaging more than $9,000 per year system-wide. Lastly, we would like to emphasize that by putting student tuition increases on autopilot, you abdicate your responsibility as trustees. It's simply unacceptable to create a policy that insulates you from evaluating fully any proposal that may affect the ability of California's students to attend the CSU. When the administration proposes tuition increases, trustees must discuss and assess the merit of each increase. And you must be prepared to hear what the students, faculty, staff, and the community think about the proposal. Automating student tuition fee increases increasingly treats students like ATMs, taking money from them and their families without having to be accountable for your actions. We urge you not to adopt a policy that absolves you and future boards of that responsibility.
Thank you, and thank you all to all the speakers. That concludes our public testimony. I'd like to move on to our discussion agenda now. Item number 1 is an information item presented by Executive Vice Chancellor Steve Relier, President Elliot Hirschman, and President Leroy Morishida on the Sustainable Financial Model Task Force Draft Report. Steve, will you please begin the presentation?
Thank you, Trustee Day. Over a year ago, the Chancellor discussed with the Board the need to charge a task force to review several interrelated elements that affect how we acquire and allocate resources in an effort to provide current and prospective students a quality education. The task force for a sustainable financial model for the CSU produced the draft report, which you now have attached to your agenda, that reflects our commitment to all that we can do to achieve the goals that the Chancellor touched on in his State of the University remarks earlier this morning. This afternoon, the co-chairs of the task force, President Hirschman, President Morishida, and I will describe the recommendations from the task force report. Now, as a reminder, this item is an information item intended to generate discussion about ways that we can improve our ability to financially support our students and the university's mission. At future meetings of the Board, we'll bring back individual items from the report for discussion and possible action. Other recommendations will require assembling the right individuals to develop further potential initiatives. So why at this point would we be evaluating our current financial model? Why do we need a new financial model? Well, over the last couple of decades, the financial condition of the CSU has shifted dramatically. As recent as the early 2000s, the state supplied the vast majority of revenues to cover CSU operating costs. However, economic recessions, state and federal mandates, and the state's decisions to invest in other priorities have changed the landscape. State support of the CSU operating budget has declined, faculty and staff have had to do more with less, and as a result, students and their families now pay a significant portion of educational costs. In addition, the state has largely shifted responsibility for CSU's capital projects to the university operating budget. And the university is increasingly being held responsible for local mitigation impacts on transportation and other areas. Demand for a CSU education is at an all-time high, but due to limited resources, the CSU is unable to offer a sufficient number of courses and support services to serve this demand, as well as sufficiently addressing deferred maintenance and capital outlay needs. And as the Chancellor stated in his message this morning, the public policy experts have concluded that California's higher education segments are not on pace to supply the California economy with the required graduates to meet 2030 workforce demands. There is no question that meeting these challenges will require increased state support, but increased state support alone will not be sufficient. The draft report presented today recommends further consideration of a series of actions and new tools beyond increases in general fund appropriation to support student achievement into the future. It is our belief that the current financial model is not sustainable in the long run and now threatens to access the high-quality education offered by CSU campuses. It should also be noted that even if all the recommendations in this report are adopted, it is critical that the state of California increase its investment in the university in the future to maintain educational quality, provide student access, and maintain an affordable cost for our students. And the task force firmly believes that its investment, the state's investment in the university, is the best investment the state can make in its own economic future. So I'll briefly cover the membership and process used to develop the report, and then co-chairs President Hirschman and President Marishta and I will go over a number of the recommendations in the report. So with that, if I could have the next slide. So the membership of the task force was drawn across the system and included campus presidents, student trustees, the chair of the California State Student Association, our faculty trustee, the chair of the Academic Senate, campus provost, campus financial officers, and a campus vice president for student affairs. The task force completed an initial draft report this past August, and we began to broadly consult with stakeholders of the university, including the Academic Senate, the California State Student Association, council presidents, as well as campus vice presidents, legislative and state representatives, and many others. In addition, we published the draft report on our website and provided an opportunity for anyone to comment electronically. The task force reconvened in the fall to consider the comments received during the consultation phase, and the draft report that you now have includes those comments. Next slide. The task force recommendations fell in, you know what? I'm going to go one more slide. There we go. Okay. The task force recommendations fell in the major areas that are shown on this slide. First of all, how do we increase the effectiveness of how we manage our resources? How do we better manage our costs? How do we improve our internal allocation processes? And how can we increase and diversify our revenue sources? All of this is in the context of supporting a quality education and student achievement. President Hirschman will cover recommendations designed to support a quality educational experience and student achievement, as well as administrative effectiveness. President Hirschman.
Thank you. The central focus of our report is to enhance the quality of students' educational experiences. And in this context, we have several recommendations to directly enhance students' experience. First, given the large impact of research experience on student retention, we recommend expansion of research funding opportunities for students. Second, to ensure that students are prepared to succeed when they join us, we recommend further collaboration with K-12 to enhance students' preparation in English and mathematics. Third, to enhance access, we recommend the implementation of a comprehensive admissions redirections process. Could I have the next slide? A second area considered ways to enhance administrative efficiency so we can reallocate resources to support our academic mission. Our primary recommendation in this area is a comprehensive review of existing policies and procedures to remove unnecessary bureaucracy. This will include the improvement of university-wide administrative systems. We also recommend considering ways to increase the efficiencies of our facility schedule, including pursuing additional state funding for summer enrollment. Similarly, we recommend the use of public-private partnerships explicitly for the construction of new facilities. President Marishta will now review recommendations concerning resource allocation and revenue generation.
Thank you, Elliot. The task force also examined our internal reallocation process. The first recommendation emphasizes the need to make internal allocations for enrollment adjustments, direct, transparent, and standard across the system. We have not always done this in the past, so that's why this came out as a very important recommendation. We recognize also, though, that newer and smaller campuses may require additional funding for fixed operating costs because they have not yet reached economies of scale as some of the medium and large-sized campuses. In addition to allocation methodologies tied to enrollment size and growth, the task force recommends that student success and completion measures might also be considered in the budget allocation process for some of the funds that we are able to garner. The task force emphasized the importance of the CSU's new capital financing authority, which we need to take advantage of, as well as the need to have adequate reserves to help ensure that resources are available and devoted to address the ongoing problem of deferred maintenance and our space needs on the campuses as we grow. Another area is looking at managing our costs. And so to best utilize those resources, we felt that there are several recommendations that we wanted to make. First, a review of the structure and cost of our current health benefit and pension programs, as mentioned previously, is essential to ensure that we can maintain these programs into the future. Health and welfare premiums have grown 41% over the past 3 years alone. We have faced additional challenges with the pension program because, as Executive Vice Chancellor Rallier said, the state no longer will provide funding to the CSU for pension costs for employees hired after June 30th, 2014. The task force also recommends a careful review of the State University Grant Program, which provides tuition discounts to students who qualify based on the federal financial aid methodology. The existing State University Grant Program has doubled in size over the past 10 years and now constitutes $650 million in foregone revenue for the CSU. We recommend that funding is pursued to replace tuition discounts with direct grants to students. Executive Vice Chancellor, we will now review recommendations related to revenue generation. Steve?
Thank you, President Marishta. The task force spent a significant amount of time discussing how to increase funding to the university and further diversify our funding sources. Recommendations in this part of the report included going after legislative changes to broaden our flexibility and opportunities with how we invest our reserves, that we enhance campus fundraising infrastructure and investments in the resources needed to strengthen relationships with our alumni donors. Recognizing that the past practice of having extended periods without tuition increases followed by unplanned large spikes in tuition is not really a sustainable model and doesn't provide students with predictable financial planning parameters. The task force, therefore, recommends that we consider small planned increases on a regular basis that are tied to some index, such as inflation. The task force also suggested that we consider campus-specific non-resident tuition rates and allow campuses on a differential basis to look at campuses that are in their market to adjust those rates for non-residents. Now, let me be clear, we're not recommending a tuition increase at this time or for next year. However, we do want to consider going forward that tuition cannot remain flat, and to have the types of unplanned spikes is not fair to students and their families. The intent of this recommendation is that we'll inevitably increase tuition, and to make it modest and predictable over a period of time is going to be in the best interests of the university and its students. Next slide. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, some of the recommendations require additional study, and based on the discussion today, we'll initiate those consultative actions as appropriate. And the Chancellor will establish work groups to develop implementation plans for a number of these recommendations. Other recommendations, such as those regarding changes to internal processes that we've discussed, have been initiated in some degree, in some cases, and we're already pursuing legislative changes to implement recommendations concerning expansion of our investment authority. Before I conclude the presentation, I do want to thank the members of the task force who worked many, many hours to prepare the draft report over the past year and also took the time to comment and provide ideas for the initial draft. I also want to thank all of the folks who advised us during the consultation process and provided comments on the website for the great information and comments that they provided. President Hirschman, President Marishta, members of the task force, and I would appreciate any thoughts you have regarding the report and be glad to respond to any questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Leroy and Elliot, again for your presentation and your participation heading up this task force. I know there's probably a bit of interest in a few questions from the board. Before we get to that, I'd personally like to thank and compliment Tim for your vision and your leadership in creating this task force, and obviously to the three co-chairmen for spearheading this effort. It's an important subject for the future success, continued future success of CSU and all the campuses, and it takes a lot of hard, critical thinking. Some subjects that are easy to talk about, perhaps, and difficult and challenging, but that's what we're here to do, is to sort through those. So I compliment you for doing that, and I think it's a good first step to have that discussion. I think we're on the path, hopefully, with this discussion today and future discussions on some ideas that will allow us to continue to be a sustainable, quality educational system that's the best in the country. With that, I have a number of questions, but I'd like to hold mine till the end, so I'd like to defer to other committee members or trustees. I see Trustee Abrego first, and then Trustee Fagan, and Trustee Taylor.
I also would like to commend the task force for a very thorough job in preparing this report. I do have a question regarding the source of revenues. It seems that we tend to go back to the same well all the time: tuition increases, philanthropic activities, and so forth. Have we ever thought about going outside the box? And now I know about Texas using fossil fuel extraction taxes to finance higher education, and some other states do that as well. Have we thought of different types of alternative sources of revenue besides the traditional ones?
Thank you, Trustee Abrego. It's a good question. First of all, regarding on the topic of tuition increases, I think to a member on the task force, this is the least liked thing that we want to do. It's really, we take great pride in having a high quality education that when compared to our peers, and we're going to talk a little bit later this afternoon about some comparative data with other universities, but we take great pride in providing a high quality tuition at a low cost, and we don't want to change that. So the reason that the task force is talking about a planned gradual increase in tuition really is not to necessarily increase it, but just change the way we do it. Because right now it's very unfair to those students, depending on when they graduate from high school, when they hit the big bump, right? When is that spike that's unplanned going to hit? So on the Texas situation, I wish we had on our campuses a lot of oil wells, because I'm not sure the presidents would wish that, perhaps. I'm a financial guy, so I probably worried less maybe about the aesthetics. But the point you bring up is a good one, because what Texas has done is, been able to leverage an asset that the state has to improve the support of higher education. And so likewise, in the report, there is a fair amount of discussion about how can we, the university, partner both with public entities and private entities to leverage assets that we have that will come back in terms of support for education. So an example of that, one of the projects I know many board members are familiar with, is the Innovation Village at Cal Poly Pomona. Really a great project. And what they're leveraging there is a great piece of land that's contiguous with campus land, having companies whose mission is consistent with the university. Energy companies, or I think American Red Cross is one of the entities there, and having those companies bring in the Cal Poly Pomona students as interns. It provides a great experience for the students there, plus provides a revenue stream for the campus to improve the quality of education and help their operating budget. Another example, last week I was on Cal State LA's campus and saw a great demonstration of the partnership they have with the LA County Sheriff's Office and LAPD for their criminology program there, and the students benefit from having that kind of partnership. So there's a lot of these, and in fact, the board is going to see, I think, in the next few months or the rest of this year, a number of projects where we are taking assets, qualities, and it may not be physical assets. It may be the expertise that we have in certain areas, and partnering with public and private agencies to use their resources to better support the institution.
President Hirschman has something he'd like to add on
just,
this.
Yeah, just wanted to add that that's exactly why we're asking for the investment authority, is we want to be able to use our assets to generate more wealth. So it's exactly consistent with that.
Trustee Fagan.
I too would like to congratulate everybody on this. It's clearly a lot of work and a lot of success in coming up with these ideas. We need this kind of overall policy thinking about where we're headed in order to not do, day-to-day lurching. I had just a couple things, as you probably guessed. One thing is it really does a very good job of looking at revenue increases and how we can get more money. But one of the things that it doesn't seem to have is a real focus on re-examining where we are and what we're spending on, and maybe what we could think about reallocating or doing without. One thing this report has is creating a number of committees, so I hate to suggest creating yet another committee, but I would think it might be a great idea if one more committee could be added to it that would specifically look at almost a zero-based budgeting concept of what we're spending and what we need to spend. And I mean, everything that we spend, I think it's been pretty clear, benefits something or somebody. And so we don't want to cut back on anything unnecessarily. But sometimes in these days of limited resources, we need to do that, and certainly we need to look at the possibility of ideas. I mean, everything from, and I'm not necessarily proposing this, but things such as maybe some kind of moratorium on new construction for a while, on having to be responsible for some of those bonds that are created when you have non-self-supporting new construction. Those kinds of things, at least examining it. Maybe you come up with the answer that, no, we need that. But it'd be great to really look at that in a clear focus. And the other issue is the one of this kind of a tuition. I think looking at the thing, like any business operation or educational operation or any entity in this country, prices go up, expenses go up, time goes on. So I think it's fooling ourselves to think that we're never going to have to increase tuition at some point. It's, on the other hand, I think for a lot of us, for all of us, it's the option of last resort. And as we heard pretty well, actually, we need to own that. We need to look at data and know that there's specific need now. When we do that, I'm a little concerned about an automatic tuition treadmill that just continues on and sort of disappears in our consciousness to the point where it goes on, and then when we need more, we add more on it. I think we need to look at those kinds of specific things. We also need to hear from the community and from the legislature and different people before imposing something like that. I have some other great ideas on that, but I can't read my own writing. So But anyhow, the idea of automatic tuition increases is, I think, concerning. Certainly understandable. The argument for it, I think, is on its surface terrific, because it would be automatic and it would give people an ability to know what's going on, and we could avoid those kinds of large increases. But that's what we're here to do, is decide when those increases have to take effect. Maybe we want to each year look at small increases individually and do those if that's what's needed. But to have it as an automatic experience is greatly troubling. The other thing is, don't forget, there's the issue of compounding. And when you start having an automatic tuition increase year after year after year, it's not 1% or 2% or 3%. 2% over 5 years isn't 10%. I don't know what it is, but it's got to be 11 or 12. So these are not numbers that are going to be small over a period of time when it's that kind of automatic situation.
Thank you, Trustee Fagan. President Hirschman, response?
I think we're starting to play academic telephone a little bit. So I don't believe anyone on the task force proposes an automatic tuition increase. I think that was something that people have interpreted. The idea is just to use inflation as a benchmark to consider the possibility each year, as you're suggesting. So if it was stated inelegantly, we may have to go back and revise that, but that was definitely not anyone's intention. The second clarification is just to indicate, again, this may be a inelegant language, the notion of a comprehensive review of existing policies and procedures to remove unnecessary bureaucracy was for the purpose of reducing costs. So exactly what you had stated.
Thank you, President Mishida.
Also, I want to state that we have managed our costs over the last few years and save about $200 million in terms of services that we have provided. Plus, given the budget crisis and the cuts that we have absorbed, we all have cut back tremendously. So there's nothing wrong with continuing to look at ways that we can do that. We do a lot of shared services types of examination. We work with the UC on our energy policies. We work with the community colleges on some other policies. So we're really looking at shared services types of things to save money. But we're also, as you suggest, it doesn't hurt to look at further, but we continue to do so on a regular basis.
Trustee Fagan.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I'm aware of the efforts on everybody's part to spend as efficiently as possible and not spend needlessly. But what I bring it up in is the context of this report that focuses so much on revenue side and not much on the expense side. Elliot, I just wanted to read the recommendation in the report. It says the task force recommends that the Board of Trustees consider enacting small annual system-wide tuition increases tied to the rate of inflation designed to maintain the purchasing power of the revenue collected and mitigate future large unplanned tuition increases. That seems to me to say we're urging you to consider enacting small annual system-wide tuition increases. So maybe there's a misinterpretation by the members of the committee and whoever wrote this report.
There we go. The idea is that each year we want the board to consider that. That's the recommendation. It's not that the policy is that it happens automatically each year.
In that case, I would suggest going back to your English department and ask them for help.
Just a point of clarification on that point. Steve, there's nothing in this document that I read that would change the statutory or normal course of action as it relates to business of this board in the trustees both submitting and approving a budget recommendation. Therefore, on an annual basis, the board would still be voting on a budget that was a series of revenues and expenditures, and therefore, even if this was policy and there was this thinking about an annual tuition increase set to CPI or something else, it still wouldn't change the annual decision-making process. It would require this board to take an affirmative vote in that regard. Am I correct?
That is absolutely correct. And in addition to the normal processes that the board has, there's also, there before we would even consider a tuition increase, there'd be a very long process of a lot of consultation and before we even got to the board process. So you're absolutely right.
Do we have a number of trustees who want to ask questions or comment? Trustee Taylor is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for that clarification, President Hirschman. I too kind of interpreted it the same way as Trustee Fagan. So thank you very much. I appreciate that clarity. As somebody who has staffed a task force like this in the past, I really appreciate the amount of time, effort, and energy that went to it. I know it's a lot of work. It's all consuming, in fact, at times. So thank you. I think, frankly, I've made a lot of notes and comments. I made over 70 notes and comments. I'm not going to get them all today, but I did kind of group some of them into 3 categories: those that I liked, those that I think need a little more clarity, and those that I thought were a little bit troubling. So maybe you can clarify some things. I really liked the emphasis on P3. I think that's something we have to look at. You know, we have a lot of campuses with essential elements for P3 success: vacant land and student demand. If you don't have those 2 things, P3s don't work. But if you do, you can then take them to the next level. And not just for the easy things like housing. Student housing, P3s have been done all over the country. But I would encourage you to look at UC Merced. UC Merced's a campus with 6,000 students that has to get to 10,000 like day before yesterday. And they're doing a huge P3 project: student housing, parking, academic facilities, administrative facilities. Worth looking at how they're approaching something that big and broad. They've put 3+ years into this plan. So I'm sure they'd be more than happy to let us plagiarize and copy at will. I really appreciate the focus on managing pension and healthcare costs. I did not realize that the post-July 2014 employees are all ours for pension. It's an enormous responsibility that will, I promise you, chew up more and more and more of our discretionary revenues. And so we've got to have a plan on that, and that will be a very tough nut. The emphasis on philanthropy, terrific, terribly important. We have students that foundations want to support. I run a foundation that wants to support these kind of kids, but we need the infrastructure in place in order to solicit gifts and do donor management. So that's well worth investing in. On the clarity front, things I think I liked, but I wasn't 100% sure. The admission redirection program was intriguing. The market-based non-resident tuition was intriguing. I read a sentence on page 14 on capital facilities. I'll read this back to you. CSU policy should acknowledge providing each campus with the flexibility and authority to allocate available resources to meet its operating and capital needs, and should allow each campus to establish priorities of its needs. And I'm like, you mean we're not doing that right now? I mean, seriously? That one is kind of like a no-brainer. So I only put that in the one I need more clarity, because if we're not doing that now, that's another one we ought to be doing day before yesterday. The ones I think I found a little bit troubling, or maybe I guess I just kind of want to be super clear about where I come from. I appreciate the emphasis on more research, and I understand the value that research can have in helping undergraduates, particularly if the undergraduates are involved in research projects. But I also come most recently from an institution where, with all due respect, research came ahead of teaching. And I will die on the sword to keep CSU from ever becoming that kind of an institution. So I'm okay with research. I love the idea of engaging undergraduates, but the second that faculty research starts to take precedent over teaching of undergraduates, boy, you'll sure hear from me like on a regular basis. So just wanted to make that real clear. Secondly, the investment authority, as you know, I support that. Steve, I've tried to be helpful. You and I have had several side conversations. I did not see in there one mention of the word fiduciary. I even pulled it up on Acrobat Adobe and did a search function. The word fiduciary wasn't there. People sitting around this horseshoe are the ultimate fiduciary when it comes to our investment policies, procedures, and ultimately results. And so I was a little bit concerned by the recommendation that says we need to integrate environmental and social policies into an investment policy statement for working capital funds. That's a bad idea. Just from an investment point of view, you know, it's not an endowment. It's not a long-term pension fund. These are short-term working capital funds that you simply cannot over-concentrate in one asset class. Otherwise, you have more volatility and more risk. And reserves that campuses think are available for that project 2 years down the road suddenly disappear because now you've gone too deep into a specific slice of the investable universe that hopefully people sign off on as not being too controversial. So That's a bad policy in terms of risk. Remember, I want an investment policy that allows me to sleep well at night. The approach you've taken here does not allow me to sleep well at night. Let me also, so it's a general thing, right? You had a task force, you worked for a year, produced a lot of good information, but you called on creating 8 more task forces, 8 more work groups, without a sense of urgency that say they must meet by X date and they must produce recommendations by Y date. I didn't see that. And so that lack of sense of urgency bothered me a little bit. And, you know, I guess there was also just an ongoing theme that seemed like there would be an ongoing reliance on the state to continue to pay our bills. So during the course of my investment banking career, I spent a lot of time working with utility companies, but I did a 10-year run as the state's banker on their cash flow notes. And so I spent a ton of time studying the California state budget and how it's structured and where revenues come from and where expenses go, because I had to represent all that to rating agencies, to investors. And with all due respect, we cannot, there are not enough tax increases that the state can put in place to continue to allow us to be overly reliant on the state of California. We have got to come up with new and other ways to sustain ourselves, sustain our excellence. Otherwise, you'll see a slow degrading into mediocrity, which is the last thing any of us would ever be associated with. A word about efficiencies. You know, that's like my favorite topic. It's a brutal topic though, right? Because a lot of times you're talking about things, you sit there and you say, it's not broke. But very often it needs to be fixed. You know, when I was at UC, we had an accounts payable department. I had no worry. They were doing their job on time. Quality of the work was accurate. They had 49 people. And when we did a process review, you know what we found? Really, they only needed 17 people. So we cut 32 FTE and moved those into the teaching function. So we didn't cut costs, we repurposed revenues. And it's terribly important in the efficiencies discussion to remind people that it's not about cutting costs just because you can. It's about moving cash into the classroom. What does that mean? More tenure track faculty, more classes, smaller classes. And if you've got a department with 49 that can get by with 17, it might not be broke, but it needs to be fixed. And so redoubling our efforts to find those kinds of things are terribly important. And in my view, you got to do it before you start talking about tuition increases. I understand you can't have tuition flat forever. Laws of inflation will eventually rule against you, but you got to constantly be in a position to tell students and their families that the tuition increase is critically important to maintain excellence. And one way you do that is you say, we've looked at under every rock possible to squeeze every dollar we can out of what we have. So that's probably 25 of the 70 some odd comments I had, but I hope you take those to heart, and I very much look forward to continuing to examine ways that we can make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Eisen, and then followed by Trustee Garcia.
Thank you. Well, I sort of want to join in the chorus of thank yous and congratulations to the Chancellor for his vision, really, in putting this together for the benefit of this remarkable institution, and for all of the people who worked on this draft report. I agree with Trustee Taylor. It is it's obvious that it was an enormous amount of work. And we are blessed to have people who would commit the time and the expertise to do that, and in particular, the presidents who have so much else on their plates to begin with. To add this on is, you know, we owe a debt of gratitude. I don't think we should put oil wells on the campuses. I'm going to suggest wind turbines instead. But and I also wanted to just say, I have a fantastic master's degree in English from a Cal State, and I am the first person to complain if you say less when you mean fewer. I thought this was extraordinarily well written. I don't know who did it, but I want to congratulate them, because it was, the concepts, I agree with Trustee Taylor, for those of us who are lay people, will need more explication. I don't understand, for example, Enhance the State University Grant Program, what all that entails, but the clarity of the language and the presentation of the materials I thought was excellent. So I am looking forward to these committees and the work of the committees and learning more about these processes, because it is such important work. So I want to thank everybody who was participating in that. Thank you.
Trustee Garcia, then Trustee Fortune, and then Trustee Spinnick.
All right. Definitely don't have 70, but I've got quite a bit. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try very hard not to repeat what others have said. I too liked the depth of review that you all covered in these materials. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness behind it all. A lot of food for thought, lots of ideas generating at this point and since reading the materials. So thank you for that. It is a lot of work. You know, I did like, the only thing I'm going to comment on public-private 3Ps, thank you for coming up with that, 3Ps, is that I took a look at Executive Order 747 that's referenced in the materials, and I felt really good about the level of detail that's set out in terms of approval for any kind of development plan. So I know there's some concern, hesitation, reservation about how we use 3Ps, but I agree with Peter that this is a really good way of exploring revenue generating concepts. And I do feel that Executive Order 747 gives us, as Board of Trustee members, really good direction in terms of final approvals to look out for areas where we're not aligned. Should that be the case, we have an opportunity to step in and have a conversation and figure out if it really is the right way forward. I do think that there's an opportunity in that executive order, and I'd love to get guidance at a later point in terms of how we might make some adjustments to this executive order, but I do think it has the proper foundation, and I think it will help guide us in making the right decisions on P3s. The other, I guess I would just want to chime in because I think it's important. It's on all of our minds. Tuition, I definitely misread it to also mean automatic. So thank you for the clarification on that. And I do think that we need to maintain the conversation. I agree. We're not going to be at a place to not have that conversation. But I just want to share my perspective that it needs to be a conversation. We need to understand it in the greater context of all things going on, totality of circumstances. But I also would agree that it should continue to be a place of last resort for us, because I do feel, and again, from looking at some of the administrative systems improvements that are proposed or asking that we consider, I'm not yet. I'm sure I can get there, but I'm not yet 100% convinced that we have looked under every rock. I mean, when I see here that we are looking to set up a work group to evaluate existing improvements on software, hardware, and then when we talk about strategic procurement, it was my understanding that this is one of those rocks that I thought we'd already looked under. Strategic procurement is the easiest place to find gain. So I would want that to be front and center because, again, I think usually that's where you find it fastest in terms of, and again, I don't know that it's going to be a lot, but we definitely want to start there. So I still feel, based on what I'm reading here, that we have many more rocks, and we do want to be thoughtful about acting quickly because, again, I have a sense of urgency. I think we all have a sense of urgency, and I appreciate that. But because I'm concerned that I think we've had a conversation around strategic procurement, I would like us to have timelines on these work groups. And I know that's later. You know, I know right now you're just kicking off the conversation, so I appreciate that. But I do definitely want to hold us accountable, ourselves included as a Board of Trustees, to help and support all of you in the work, but that we can come to some specific timelines for this work. And then I had a question on the resource allocation section where we talk about internal allocations for enrollment. And we're talking about internal allocation methodology should be modified to address funding of enrollment growth and should focus on the allocation of new dollars for the express purpose of instruction. And so the new dollars, should we find additional revenue streams? Are these the new dollars that are being referenced here? I was unclear. someone?
Those are dollars that are coming, that we request from the state of FTEs dollars per FTE. And in the past, we've looked at fee revenue collection that might occur on an individual campus, so that a given campus, President Garcia's campus might get more general fund than my campus might get, because I might collect a little bit more fee money because of the mix of students. So we were just saying, let's make it just uniform, that we get the same general fund amount. And so for the first time, we did that this past year. So it's just simplifying the process, so you know when you go get an FTE more, how many general fund dollars do you get?
Got it. Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And then on the, sorry, that's a lot. I want to try not to repeat. Sorry, last one. Oh, the critical role of philanthropy, I think we all agree, absolutely needs to continue to be an area of focus. I was just curious from Chancellor, your perspective, or from other presidents' perspective, as a system, are we underperforming in this area? Do you feel, because I know you just talked about some of these great successes this year. The last 4 years, we've been very successful with philanthropy. So I'm just curious, the focus here.
We've moved the needle on philanthropy as a system, and also with many campuses, but not all. And however, the sense is clear that when you look at the percentage of alumni who are re-engaging with the campuses, while there's variation across the campuses, it's still very low. And so we see opportunity there, that if we can reignite that relationship, that their passion for the university will then lead to more philanthropy. And I think there are several campuses who are in communities of California where the business communities and industries are enormous beneficiaries of regional production of the workforce, who are not at all involved in supporting the university. And so I think it's, while we've made tremendous progress, we actually think we're just scratching a little bit at the surface. But this type of effort isn't something that you put in an hour today and get $1 next week. It is really building to the point I think that Trustee Taylor made. It's investing in that infrastructure, which at first is a cost, but then pretty soon becomes an investment and a return on that. And I don't know exactly the number, Lori Redfern or to Garrett, but I think we're something in the area of a little bit shy of $6 return. For every dollar we spend on philanthropy right now, I think it's $5.60 or $5.70 or a little bit less than $6 return. So it's not a bad, I don't know how your investments are doing, but
You're doing much better. So I guess then thank you for that. I guess my question would be, when we say to invest in university advancement, so what we're asking is that we shift dollars to advancement, and where would we be shifting from?
From something else on the campus. Maybe we could ask President Armstrong to comment.
Well, I was wanting to follow up on the Chancellor's comment that it's long-term and it takes investment, which may be viewed as cost. And so if you look, I think we all know what a lot of other colleagues in other locations are doing. We are not investing enough in development, marketing, or alumni relations. And if you think back, it's directly correlated with the fact that the state provided so much support for many years. You could look at size of endowments at universities across the country, and there's a strong relationship on the size of the endowment and how long they've been away from state support. So that's important. So I don't think we all look at what monies would we redirect toward these efforts. We're looking at alternative sources of revenue. We're looking at increasing our annual giving. We're looking at ways to fund it. So I don't think any of us would see that the future of philanthropy is to pull money from the classroom or any other source. The key is finding other sources that can be used to generate even more money for the classroom and faculty and students.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you, Trustee Garcia. Trustee Fortune and Trustee Spinnick after that, and Trustee Brewer.
So I'm going to resist the temptation to be pragmatic and instead be philosophical. and say that philosophically, I agree that California should be making an investment to make sure that tuition is affordable. And I think it's always important to keep that North Star in front of us, even in the pragmatic discussions, because the community colleges in K-12 are having their bodies nourished. We're being replenished, and I'm experiencing it because we're a part of the Prop 98 guarantee. And when money comes into the coffers, we get taken care of. And for my school system, it's meant per pupil funding going from in the 6,000s in the depths of the recession to now in the 9,000s as we recover. And that has meant that we were able to give raises to our teachers that we hadn't been able to do in a climate where people were just lucky to have jobs. And we were able to bring them to the median for the county, which was a big deal for us. It has meant that we are reintroducing arts education and music education into our school system and not just exclusively focusing on reading and math. It has meant that we have had the money to invest in instructional materials that are aligned to the Common Core state standards, which the tests are aligned to, but we didn't have the books that were aligned to it. So being a priority and something that the public says we ought to invest in is something that I think should continue to be our North Star, and we shouldn't lose sight of that in this discussion. And to go to examples from other countries, Germany pays for their students to go to college. They also track them into vocational education by 4th grade, but we might want to leave that aside. But the notion that a nation would invest in the education of its people is one that I support, and there is no but. I also want to not so quickly dismiss Trustee Abrego's point about oil and gas taxes. I think their severance or their severance tax. That actually came up recently in legislation, SB 1017, I think in the 2013-14 legislative cycle. And I remember being at the board and having some advocates come up wanting us to discuss that. And at the time we were in the throes of the recession, and we didn't have the discussion. Perhaps I should have made a point of it then, but I didn't. But I found it curious that we didn't at least discuss it. Maybe it's not a good idea, but in the legislation, or the bill that was introduced, it says California is the nation's 4th largest producer of oil, after only North Dakota, Texas, and Alaska. And it is the only one of 36 oil-producing states that does not have a severance tax. Now, maybe this is not true, I don't know, but I would at least, in this period where we're not under pressure and people are not yelling at us, maybe this is the time to actually explore that. To see if this is a credible idea. I know we made light of it by talking about extracting oil from the campuses, but I don't want to make light of it because that's not the point. There have been other initiatives that have been funded off of industries. For example, I sat on the inaugural board of the first 5 state commission in which Rob Reiner got taxed cigarettes. And to this day, there are extra resources for children 0 to 5. So I just wanted to say I would not so quickly dismiss that idea.
Thank you, Trustee Fortune. Trustee Stepanek and Trustee Brewer.
Thank you. As was kind of alluded to earlier, and for full disclosure, I am a member of this particular task force. So these aren't so much questions as they are communications back based on some of the things that were said. The state definitely needs to look at all possible, we need to look at all possible ways that we can increase the state support for the CSU. That's absolutely critical. But at the core of this particular report is its title, which says for a sustainable financial model. One of the things that this particular task force was aiming to try to do was to look how we can provide some level of stability, that while we look for additional sources of income, that by the same token that we potentially would be able to make promises to incoming freshman students saying like, okay, you're going to be here for the next 4 or 5 years. This is going to be what the tuition rates are going to be for those years. That we don't have any surprises that 2 years in, it's like, oh yeah, because of some problems and we're at the mercy of Sacramento, we now have to raise your tuition 20%. That is something we are looking to try to avoid. That's the whole idea of more sustainable financial model. So that's kind of part of the ultimate goal for some of the stuff that we're trying to do here. So with that particular context in mind, I think we do definitely need to be looking at having this idea of the tuition increases as kind of a specified, what would almost be like a, unless we can reduce it, assume that this is going to happen each year, but we do have a vote to see what it actually looks like. But again, it's provide that capability of being able to compute just what's going on. Also, the idea of the sustainable model is so that the campuses, a year or two ahead of time, would be able to have a fairly reasonable idea of exactly how much money that they're going to be getting. Part of the problem that's happening right now for the whole structure, what's going on right now, we are still waiting. Well, we now have the budget for the next fiscal year. So we're going to start to be able to calculate out and be able to tell the campuses how much money they're going to get for that particular year. But they can't really calculate how much they're going to get for the year after that, because we haven't put together the budget. We don't know what Sacramento's going to be like. We don't know what's going to happen at any of that particular level. One other comment I'm also going to make, it hasn't really come up here, but I know it's a big concern for a lot of students and has to do with SUGs. The proposal in this particular report at one level may seem to imply that we would like to get rid of them. But once again, that's a legacy issue, and what we really want to do is recognize exactly what they are. They are specialized tuition discounts for various students that are in special need. And it's as much more of a bookkeeping correction as anything else, because right now what ends up happening is the legislators in Sacramento thinks that we take in a lot more money in tuition than we actually do. I won't get into the details of how all that works. But if we try to correct it so that we're not really taking anything away from the students, but we're just making it more upfront in terms of what monies is really coming into the CSU as a result of tuitions. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Brewer.
Thanks. I also will disclose that I had the opportunity to sit on the task force, and I actually wanted to say thank you to Steve Rallier for authentically and eagerly including both myself and CSSA President Taylor Herron in that process. We felt that it really did embody the whole idea of shared governance, and so we wanted to say thank you for that. There's a lot of really great recommendations in the report, and I think that it's important to note some of the good things that come out of this. I think that the redirection plan that promotes accessibility where it's available is a really new and creative way for us to address the issue of access in our system. And I think that year-round operations have the potential to improve graduation rates throughout the system. The only thing that I would add is that we also need to work on year-round financial aid if we want to make that a reality. I also really appreciate the attention to the issue surrounding deferred maintenance. I don't think that we're in a place now, and I don't think that we've been in a place for quite some time where we can just afford to continue to let our buildings fall apart. And personally, I see this less as a threat to our financial future, but more as a threat to our academic future. So I think whatever task force is assembled to deal with that has their work cut out for them. But despite all of the good that came out of this report, there are some general concerns that students have. The first one would be, and Trustee Sapanic kind of alluded to it, is the State University Grant Program. And we have a presentation on this later. I'm really looking forward to kind of learning about this a little bit more. The only thing that I would emphasize from a student perspective is that any changes should take into consideration that this program helps some of the most needy students in our system. And so any changes to it have to focus on affordability and limiting the negative impacts to students. And then lastly, the tuition piece, which everybody has already talked about, but I'm going to throw in my 2 cents about it also. This one's a little hard to talk about because I don't reject the analysis of the report that we need new revenue streams. I think that everybody who sat here for the last couple of years knows that we need that. The thing that I struggle with is that we have to pass it along to students. Tuition in our system has doubled in the last decade. And with 77% of our students receiving financial aid and 3 out of 4 of them working 20 hours a week to make ends meet, any increase in tuition to them is detrimental. And I know that we're not having that conversation today, but as we move forward with that recommendation, I would urge us to have extreme caution in that area. But the last thing I want to say is at the end of the day, I'm really, really excited about this report. I'm excited that we're being proactive instead of being reactive. And I'm actually really excited about the potential that this report has to be an advocacy tool with the legislature. Both myself and Trustee White had the opportunity to meet with students of the California State Student Association this last weekend, and CSSA represents all 23 campuses in our system. And not surprisingly, they felt very strongly about the report in a lot of different ways. But despite some of the differing opinions that all of us had, there was one kind of common theme that we all could agree on. And that's that this report provides a clear choice for the legislature and the governor. Either prioritize state investment in the CSU that supports access, affordability, quality, and completion, or continue insufficient and irregular contributions to a CSU that affords fewer educational opportunities to students who need them most and creates more debt for students who can find a way to attend. And I just really hope that this board takes to heart this report and we continue to build upon it and do the work that's necessary to ensure that we don't have to make the latter choice a reality.
Thank you, Chair Monville.
Thank you, Chair Day. I too want to thank the entire task force for this work. I think it's tremendous. I'm going to do the same as my colleagues and try not to be repetitive. I think I dog-eared every page in the report, so I have numerous comments. But I think generally, I think Trustee Brewer's closing remarks are mindful for me, and where I view this as part of an ongoing conversation. And so I look forward to having continued conversations through the spring as we continue to give some policy direction to staff as we move these concepts forward. So as I think Trustee Garcia, Trustee Taylor said, metrics, timelines. I know we need some additional work groups. I know we're going to have some additional study. What does that look like? What are the timing of those things? Who are involved in those discussions, I think will be helpful for our ongoing discussions. In a couple specific areas, and I'm just going to take these items in order. I think under student access, there was something that I thought was lacking, something I think that we've talked about in ed policy before, something I know my colleague Trustee Fagan is very fond of, related to, how do we use technology, online education in particular, to expand access? For me in particular, how do we expand access in those GE or other bottleneck courses amongst campuses? I think in working with the Academic Senate, we've got to be able to find a way to make Algebra 101 at Stanislaus the same as Algebra 101 at San Diego, and be able to provide more access to our students in there. So I think there's an opportunity to have that discussion. I know the Senate would like to be involved in that and would encourage that, but I think that is an area in access that we could explore further, and I would encourage us to do so. Knowing that there is a recommendation for a further work group, so I would just like to have that topic included there, and I know that's something that the students would be very excited. And I think if we're going to continue to shrink the time to degree, I think allowing a student who might be place-bound to use resources on one campus remotely from another, I think is a great solution for us, and it's only going to help us increase our graduation rate. Under administrative effectiveness, just for the value of the discussion today, Steve, there's a comment in there regarding changes that we need in Ed Code, California Code, regulations, CSU policy that would, that currently constrain our flexibility. Could you give an example or two today, just for the purposes of discussion, to give the board the kinds of things you're thinking about?
Sure. Thank you, Chair Monville. An example, and it's also tied to a comment that Trustee Taylor made, is that, given that the landscape has changed, we the CSU now have responsibility for our capital program. The state is no longer providing financing for capital projects. We're expected to somehow carve out money out of our operating budget to serve the debt on new capital projects. So what that means is like a private university or a business, we're going to have to look very carefully at our capital priorities, deferred maintenance priorities, and then carve out funds out of the operating budget to put in designated reserves for those projects. Now, as you're building up the funds for those projects, what you'd like to have happen is that the balance in those reserves do not get eaten away by inflation, right? You want at least that money to be working for you. Currently, because of statutes that are in the state, we are, unlike a lot of other universities, including the University of California, we cannot invest in a conservative, balanced portfolio that will at least grow those funds something above the inflation rate. Right now, it is constrained to a limited limited definition of a fixed income security, which is why we come to the board and we say, well, gee, in this time where other universities are earning this, we've earned 0.5% on the money, and inflation, of course, has been more than that. So that's an example of something where we think at the time someone made that regulation, it probably made sense. There was full funding of the university. There was a big, robust capital program. People didn't worry about it. But now that the rules have changed in the last few years, it's time to kind of relook at these kinds of regulations.
Thank you for that. In the section about maximize the use of facilities, I'm very, very supportive of that concept. I do want to be mindful of the students' admonition, which I think is a good one, that if we're going to go to more year-round operations, we need to have year-round financial aid to support that. I think that's a no-brainer for this board, but I want to be mindful of it. The one area in that, there's two areas I'd like to touch on. One was I'd like to see more robust discussion about better utilization of the facilities on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays in the traditional academic calendar, because I think for those of us who have been to those facilities, we know that the utilization there is lacking, and I think there's opportunity there. And then secondarily, and this is more global, but maybe if any of the presidents have some feedback, as we talk in this report, as it goes, to the more year-round, and we talk about some real opportunity to expand enrollment. Does anyone have any I'm not holding anybody to data today, but any figures of what kind of enrollment growth do we think we could achieve? I don't know if any of the, President Marista?
Cal State East Bay had 40% of the fall enrollment enrolled in the summer. 40%. Okay, so that we were the highest in the system.
Yeah.
And it just had to do, I think, with our population of students and our location and everything like that.
Sure.
But
I think that's
a very high, it's a very robust number. But
yeah, absolutely.
But we were very proud of that.
As we continue to look at that, ever increasing growth, right, in applicants, if we can expand the opportunity for them, I think that's terrific. Tomas?
Yeah, we experienced a 15% growth in students from summer 2014 to summer 2015, and we're planning for an additional 10% growth above that number for 2016 with the advent of Summer Pell, which it appears may in fact happen. This would be a significant opportunity for our students, for us to address bottleneck courses during the summer and to really identify our seniors who are close to graduating and really getting them through to the finish line. In addition, increased summer enrollment could provide us with a great opportunity to help our freshmen who may be underprepared academically to begin working to create their academic proficiencies before they start their first fall quarter during the summer as well. So I think it really can serve both all undergraduate students in a larger summer enrollment.
Yes, we're in the midst of developing a master plan, and we're looking at facility maximum of 25,000, and with partial use of year-round, we could take that up to around 28.
Yeah, so I appreciate the feedback. That's, my sense is we're going to get some real growth in the system to really address the needs of the students that are coming to us, and I just think that continuing that dialogue is helpful for this body. as we go into the discussion in here about P3, which I'm fully supportive of, I do want to be mindful of the faculty's concerns as it relates to treading into the area of academic freedom. I would also probably ask a few presidents to comment on this. My experience has been, I've now been on every campus in the system. Every campus I've toured, what I find is the opposite. It is the P3 dollars, the private dollars that are coming to campus are actually expanding opportunities for academic freedom, expanding opportunities for faculty research, expanding opportunities for student involvement in that. I'd perhaps like some comments. I mean, I want to be delicate as we go down this road, but my sense is, frankly, the state's not providing any dollars for that type of faculty scholarship and research these days, and that the way we're going to do it is from those outside sources, but I'd appreciate any comments from the campuses.
Any president want to jump in? Did you have one in mind, Chairman?
No, I think Elliot and I have talked about this quite a bit at San Diego State. So perhaps Elliot, if you...
SDG&E, for example, pays for senior capstone projects in engineering. That'd be an example.
Again, I want to be mindful of the concern, but I think in practice, I think it's been a real benefit to our students, and I just want to not close off dialogue. I want to increase the dialogue and set aside fears and properly manage it, I think, in that regard. As it relates to capital financing, that was an area where I think the report could stand a little bit stronger tie back to the P3, just to draw that link, because I do think that's a great opportunity, and it's one that we don't have to worry about the trend in academic freedom. So I would encourage further discussion in that. I will say, as it relates to capital financing, and I appreciate the comments in the report, I for one felt it's a little premature to set aside the concept of a student facility fee. I recognize that is not without controversy and without concern, but I still think my gut is it's too early to dismiss that. And at this early stage to take ideas off the table to me seems a little early. But I will defer to the continuing work of the task force, recognizing there's going to be additional work to be done in that regard. I would, again, be willing to, I for one would be willing to consider that further. As we talk in the alternative measures for allocation of funds, I noticed there's a comment down there about iPads. I'm going to once again raise my hand and say I'd like to get rid of iPads and find something that actually recognizes and values what the CSU contributes as it recommends the students that it serves. We're not Harvard, we're not Princeton, and to be stuck in the same bucket is completely unfair to the students, to the campuses, to the system, and puts us in an unfair playing field. So, my soapbox on that, but I'm perfectly happy with us proposing another system for us to be measured other than iPads for what it's worth. I also think, though, in that area, I think we have talked about, and I know I've had this conversation at some roundtables with CSSA, what type of financial incentive as it relates to this issue of tuition can we provide students for accelerating their time to degree? What about that student who makes the 4-year commitment? Should we give them back a semester of their tuition? Should we give them some sort of a performance bonus so that they can, take that with them to their degree as they go out into the world? I didn't see any discussion here of that, and think that's a worthwhile undertaking. I mean, if we're going to, charge students a fee, and a student, ultimately pays the same for 6 years as they do for 4, but the student that goes in 4 makes space for a new student, let's incentivize that performance. So I think that's a worthwhile discussion. I think the discussion then is it gets to university SUGs, and I appreciated Trustee Stepanik's comment. The only thing I will add there is I would like to see in the short-term recommendation, as part of the ongoing discussions on that, some further discussion as it relates to SUG and graduate students. Quite frankly, I statutorily look at our responsibility, and our primary responsibility is undergraduate education. Generally, and in most cases, those graduate students that come to us, they by definition have already achieved a degree. And at a minimum, if I could take SUG dollars that I'm giving to a graduate student, someone who already has a BA, and give that to a first-time freshman coming from an underserved community in California who really needs the hand up, to me, that's a better use of the resource, and that may be an easier place to start the conversation. So I would put that out there for further consideration. Love the discussion on philanthropy, and I appreciate that. I know as you continue to discuss that, we make a discussion about having the campuses invest some dollars in that regard. Again, that's a place I'd like to see some metrics. Is that 2%? Is it 1%? Is it 5%? Just so that everybody is clear up front when we go into that discussion what the expectation is and what dollars are being spent, so there's no surprises on either side of the table. The market-based issue of tuition rates, again, I really appreciated that discussion. I would also, again, back to the discussion about graduate students. I'm open to a discussion, at least this trustee is open to a discussion about market-based when you get to the graduate level. The reality of it is those programs are far more expensive, and the value added for those students coming out, take an MBA, for example, there's a lot of reward on the back end for those students. And so there may be value, and frankly, in the quality of the work that our faculty do in those graduate programs, I think some of those students would be willing to pay for that. And I think we should be willing to have a conversation in that regard. So I've said enough. Those were my big takeaway items. Again, just really terrific work, and I love the forward thinking and love the opportunity to continue the dialogue. So thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, again, I'd like to compliment staff too. I mean, it's clear we're doing more with less. The introduction to the report clearly articulates that. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that you can't have less state money and no increase in tuition and be able to continue to do what you want to do. So it's a great conversation. A lot of what's been has been said, I concur with completely. I'd like to certainly associate myself with the comments about tuition. It's a double-edged sword, obviously, but I think it's an option of last resort. I certainly agree with that, but I also think we need to discuss the concept of a very small or modest annual review. Obviously, the trustees will continue to have that the legal requirement to approve it every year. It's been a long day and a half. So clearly that's going to have to come back if we ever have that discussion. I have a couple of other concepts on the oil tax. I'm certainly willing to have that conversation too. I'd like to see that brought back. My fear is that it's going to supplant, not supplement. And so whether it's an oil tax or some other special revenue source, I'd like to make sure that we're not supplanting what we already have. At least that's my perspective.
And just point of clarification, and Garrett Ashley, check me on this. I think the last two iterations of that bill, the CSU's position was support if amended, because the CSU and the UC both had the same concern that there was no maintenance of effort provision. So if you're going to be tied to a commodity, right? The issue was we just wanted to make sure our baseline was the same. And I think, Peter, probably when you were at UC, right, it was the maintenance of effort issue. It wasn't the concept. It was make sure there's a baseline. So so I'm open to that as well. I thought I'd remind everybody, I think we've previously said we're open to it as long as we know that they're not going to walk away from, when the commodity dips. So
it was maintenance of effort and a very small amount coming to higher education that was going to try and feed every trough.
Yeah.
Therefore, it didn't make a meaningful difference in any trough.
Again, it's a great report, very well written. I won't go through all of the examples, but there's a lot of places in this report where I highlight and I write examples, question mark. I mean, a lot of sections in here I think would benefit not just the board, but certainly the public who's reading this report as we have continued dialogue in the future to really spell out examples. I'm not going to go through it here, but there's a 5 or 6 where it'd be nice to have an illustration of what that means. Two other questions or thoughts. First, as it relates to, Chair mentioned the capital facilities fee. I may have a different opinion on that, but I think we also can't lose sight of the discussion of a GO bond as it relates to, our new authorities for capital financing. We had a little bit of a discussion earlier offline. We've got to continue to see where that opportunity is in the future. We have significant deferred maintenance needs that aren't going to be solved with the new authorities that we have. We've got other new legal requirements based on Supreme Court, as an example, for all of our campuses, and that's not even talking about we're breaking ground on other new facilities for new enrollment, new capacity, new programs, et cetera. So when you're talking about a couple $1 billion, you're not going to chip away at it with our strategy right now. And then finally, just because it was brought up to me recently in Sacramento, I brought it up roughly a year ago. I know it's been discussed a long time before that, but I've not heard it come back in the last year, at least, is this idea of super seniors. And since it was brought up to me specifically up in Sacramento, I'd like to have that brought back as well. I know it's only part of the puzzle. There's a lot of pieces to this puzzle that we need to look at, but it's not just about generating revenue, because that probably won't be a sustainable future revenue source per se, but it clearly increases capacity. So we need to strongly encourage those, however you define that group, whether it's 7, 8, or 9 years. We need to strongly encourage them to or disincentivize them, however you want to term it. So I'd like to see that come back as well. I think that that concludes my comments. Anything else I'm missing from any of the trustees on that? Seeing none, I think I'd like again to congratulate the Chancellor and Steve, Leroy, Elliot. Thank you for a great report. We'll conclude. Chancellor, sorry.
Yeah. So I would like to, and I did in my earlier address, commend the folks that took the charge and took it seriously and worked literally day and night at times to execute it. I also want to commend the board for earmarking every page and to offering 70. Come on, Peter. And I think this is the board at its best, where we are willing to have the courage in a setting such as this, with students and faculty contributing to the conversation and staff, to really find a way. And so I'd like to step just for 15 seconds above all the important ideas that are in this report and in our discussion, to say what we're really after here is trying to balance three things that are related hydraulically. And that's quality, and that's access, and that's affordable to students and to the state of California. And if you fuss around with this, you can move one of those variables at the expense of the others. And the whole notion of this report is to force the discussion to make sure that we have actually sufficient resources going forward in a way that is predictable and stable and sustainable over time. So why is that important? Let's just take one example. Our faculty, our Senate, our presidents, all seek us to have more tenure-track faculty. And I have said that since the day I got here. If you know that you are going to have predictable resources of a sufficient amount in the years in front of you, then your hiring allows you to invest in permanent faculty. Whereas if you are in in either an uncertain environment or a yo-yo environment, you're going to say, oh my gosh, how do I cover these courses? And you end up hiring wonderful people, but who have less than a full complement of commitment or a full complement of contribution to the department at a very organic level. So that predictability then allows the campuses and the employees, faculty and staff, to be much more efficient and effective in the way that we go about providing these learning opportunities for our students. And the same thing on the predictability is for our students, is it's one thing to know that costs may go up in the future by a predictable and unfortunate amount, but small, versus what this board had to do and what the Regents had to do in the last downswing of the economy was mid-year catastrophic 10, 12, which ended up doubling tuition in the course of 18 or 24 months. So despite all of the wonderful questions and the concerns and the request for more information, the intent here really is altruistic. And I think it's also very consistent with our notion of a shared approach and transparent approach to put all of this stuff on the table, some of which people react to positively, some negatively before studying it, some positively after studying it. And that's what we're going to try and do here. So we're going to continue this conversation and ultimately drive it to ask the trustees to enact policies and give direction to us in order to do what I just said, and it's sufficient, predictable, and sustainable over time.
Thank you, Chancellor. Once again, you are very eloquent in putting an exclamation mark on the discussion, or in this case, wrapping a nice bow around it too. So with that, we'll move on to item 2. Item 2 is an information item providing a report on the 16-17 support budget. Executive Vice Chancellor Steve Relier and Assistant Vice Chancellor for Budget Ryan Storm will present.
Thank you, Trustee Day. During the first 6 months of each calendar year, state leaders make many budgetary decisions that culminate in a final budget act in the early summer. Recently, the governor released his budget plan for 2016-17, and for this information item, Assistant Vice Chancellor for Budget Ryan Storm will describe the CSU-specific proposals contained in the governor's budget plan, and will also describe the next steps in the budget process. So, Ryan, you want to take it?
Thank you. Good afternoon. The purpose of this presentation is to provide an update on the state's response to the trustee support budget request. I will focus my attention on the first major state step of the budget cycle, which is the governor's budget proposal from earlier this month. We've shown you this budget calendar in the past and are using it here to serve as a reminder of the state budget process. The bulk of the process at the state level runs from January through June, and we're just getting started. This next slide shows the notable governor's budget proposals affecting the CSU. As for the first item, and as we anticipated, the governor proposed a $140.4 million state general fund increase for the CSU. It is consistent with the governor's multi-year funding plan for us, and the funding can be used for all of our most pressing needs. That said, this amount is approximately a 4% increase in general fund, or a 2% increase in total operating funds, and it is $101.3 million short of the trustee support budget request to the state. At this level, it will be a significant challenge to balance and distribute these funds according to the board's priorities for student enrollment, student achievement, employee compensation, and infrastructure. The governor also proposes a one-time increase of $35 million for deferred maintenance. You will recall that the CSU received $25 million of one-time funding for this purpose in 15-16, the current year. We appreciate the additional funding, and it will allow us to make progress on some of our urgent maintenance and infrastructure needs. Even with new one-time and ongoing funding dedicated to our capital program over the past few years, the deferred maintenance backlog remains at approximately $2 billion. The next item on the screen is, again, another $35 million figure, and it's one-time cap and trade funding, which means there are fairly narrow and specific ways that we can use these funds. In this particular case, campuses would use the funds for energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. Lastly, for this slide, the governor's proposal would again require us to prepare an academic sustainability plan to establish annual goals for student achievement, measures, and outline how those goals would be met. And as proof that state budget news can quickly change, the governor's administration very recently clarified that it is not proposing to make permanent the Basic Skills Partnership Pilot Program between the California community colleges and CSU campuses. Your board materials indicate otherwise. So there's a long way to go in the state budget process. The Legislative Analyst's Office will analyze the governor's budget proposal in more detail and issue reports between now and the end of February. Like the governor's budget, the LAO's most likely state budget scenario for 2016-17 indicates that there will be a multi-billion-dollar revenue surplus that could be placed in reserve or spent on state programs, including the CSU. When comparing the two, the LAO's revenue estimate is approximately $1 billion higher than the estimate prepared by the governor's administration. And that's not too bad of a variance when you consider how far apart their estimates have been in prior years. In prior years, state budget debates had two parts. The first part of the debate was determining which revenue estimate to assume, with the second part of the debate deciding how to spend or save those monies. Today, with both revenue estimates very close together, one would expect to see the debate focused on how much to spend and save, at least for the next several months. You can see on the screen also other upcoming key events such as Assembly and Senate budget hearings, the May revision, leadership negotiations, and ultimately final enactment of the budget by the end of June. During the coming months, CSU stakeholders in this room and around the state will have many opportunities to persuade and motivate the state to provide more funding for the CSU. Our Office of Advocacy and State Relations has strategically organized monthly advocacy events in Sacramento. Other more traditional advocacy strategies are face-to-face meetings with written communications. CSU stakeholders can also utilize the power of technology and social media, such as posts, tweets, and other forms of communication that are at hand, around the clock, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to reach out to state leaders and pass along the good news of the CSU. These are just a few of the ways that the CSU message can be broadcast to state decision makers, but many other creative methods abound. For certain, the Chancellor's Office is committed to this endeavor and will work with the governor and the legislature through the entire budget process to do all that we can to ensure that the priorities of the trustee-approved support budget are met by the appropriate level of state support. Chair Day, that ends my presentation.
Thank you, Ryan. Trustee Garcia.
Thank you, Ryan. I just had a hopefully quick question. With respect to the academic sustainability plan, we've now submitted 2 reports, updates. Any feedback, from Sacramento in terms of how we're doing? I mean, we're providing a lot of data, and it would be great if, is that even something we should expect? I'm just curious.
Yes, we've definitely received feedback on those plans, and I think this year was probably the year that there was the most feedback on it. In particular, the governor's administration is really eager to see, as you all are probably aware, that our 4-year graduation rate were to be better. And frankly, that's one of the feedback items that we've received, is that the academic sustainability plan, from their perspective, could have a little bit more significant goal setting set in that way. But that also has to be balanced with the notion of the graduation initiative that this institution is putting together. But those are one of the examples of that feedback from the plan there.
Okay. Is there a way to share back? I mean, I'm sure there's a number of different bits of information, but I think for the board it would be helpful to hear specifically, like if they're, what I'm hearing is that they don't feel that our 4-year graduation goals are aggressive enough. And so maybe we should be thinking differently, and not that it will alter where we are today, but I feel like I would benefit from understanding their feedback.
The other thing that has been offered by the administration is an attempt to take a look at what are some of those goals and some of those measures by which we develop those goals around them. And they're open to the idea of perhaps tweaking some of those measures, so to speak, so that they are more aligned with and tailored to how this institution operates and what the stated goals would be for us uniquely. As you'll recall, these academic sustainability plans have about 16 measures that are both required of UC and required of us. And so what the administration has, again, another piece of feedback was that they're willing to contemplate, well, let's kick around the tires of these notions of perhaps tailoring it to each of the segments' needs, so that obviously we, as well as the state, have a joint understanding of where we could go in terms of, pushing the needle, moving further down the road in terms of, a whole host of these measures.
Okay, so I'm sorry. So just to clarify, is because again, that's helpful information that you're sharing. So is that, are there I don't know how much feedback they've provided. I know you said it's been more than the past year, but is that something that can be shared out to us so we kind of just get the highlights of what are their areas of concern or areas of opportunity that, pros, cons that you take away, your assessment of what that feedback would mean for us as we contemplate going into the next year?
I would say those are probably the 2 principal pieces of feedback that we've received from the administration. In terms of the legislature, any particular feedback, I haven't received a lot of that directly, but perhaps others in the room may have.
Steve?
So as we go through the next iteration, we will share with you all the feedback we have on the previous academic sustainability plan, so that if it does inform changes that we want to make to the academic sustainability plan, and I'm checking with my colleague Lauren, because he's our partner in this, obviously, but I'm sure we can provide you all the feedback we've received on our goals. And if you recall that we kind of do two versions of the academic sustainability plan. One that follows very strictly the guidance from the state, and then another that changes it so that it fits what we think are more appropriate measures that are more meaningful to us. And Chair Monville touched on, how you show graduation rates as one of those. So what we can do is provide that feedback when we craft the next academic sustainability, the next iteration. Is that kind of what your question was?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you so much.
And typically what we do in this report is generally due every November. So typically what we do is we have an information item in the September board meeting and then an action item in November. So we'll be able to not only share that feedback from the state, but then also provide, incorporate your feedback as well.
I think it'd be helpful to elevate that in the September meeting and to highlight past responses and
Yes.
modifications and have the board weigh in with
That's a great
policy- with
suggestion,
policy
yeah.
changes.
Thank you.
Other trustees? I'd just like to, I'm sure it was a conscious decision to have this item trail the last item, so they obviously go hand in glove in many ways. It's again a double-edged sword, for lack of a better analogy. Certainly last year was a great year as far as resources from the state are concerned for the CSU, and we should always continue to point out why or what we can do with more resources and how we can continue to be efficient. And it's a system, so it's not just taking one thing in isolation, but we also should recognize that the governor and the legislature have continued to meet us a large way towards where we want to be, while at the same time keeping tuition flat. So again, I think this support budget request along those same lines, I don't know if it's real, but I get the sense, kind of looking at Garrett and his team in Sacramento, I get the sense that maybe we're stepping off the gas pedal a little bit for this legislative session as compared to last. Obviously, last year was so successful, and it's always hard to sustain at a high level that type of success. It was a phenomenal success. Again, great congratulations to you and your team and all the presidents. So that's just an observation. I hope it's not accurate, but we'll continue to tell our story on what we can do with more resources, why it's good for the students, why it's good for the economy. And then just a quick note again on the 4-year, because again, it was discussed with me at a recent meeting in Sacramento. I really think we've got to figure out a better way to get ourselves out of that bind. We're trapped in constantly defending ourselves, and I think 4 years is great, and if we can do it, that's wonderful. But at least from my analysis of the students we're serving, it's an unrealistic. It's always great to have a goal and a target, but I just don't know that that's realistic in this day and age, given working students, given their debt, given single parents, given all the dynamics that the campuses are dealing with. So I just don't want us to be penalized for not reaching a goal or a target that's just not achievable. So, and I know it's a highly controversial subject, but I just wanted to weigh in with my 2 cents there. So any further comments from other trustees on this item? Okay, seeing none, we do have one more item on our Finance Committee agenda. Thank you, Steve and Ryan. Item 3 is another information item on the 2015-16 student fee report. And Steve, I believe you'll give the report on this.
Thank you, Trustee Day. One more for Steve and Ryan, I think.
Right.
Each year, the board is presented with the tuition and fee report as an information item, and that's what we're doing here. And so Assistant Vice Chancellor Ryan Storm will provide information on campus-based mandatory fees, and we'll also share some information about the affordability of the university. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ryan.
Thanks again, Steve. For proper context, it's important to note that all of the information that will be presented today is in the current academic year or earlier. Typically, I'm talking about the future, but we have to stay focused here on the current year. So this table, I apologize in advance on this, but it's difficult to read, and so please refer to page 2 of your finance item number 3 of your board materials. This slide shows the campus-based mandatory fees by campus for the current academic year, that is 2015-16. These fees vary greatly from campus to campus, as the CSU fee policy is designed to allow campuses flexibility to set and adjust fees according to unique campus needs. The table also shows a collection of choices by students and campuses over the years to create fees for academic purposes, as well as for specific non-academic purposes. Student Body Center, Student Body Association, athletics, school spirit, and health services fees are some examples. Many of these non-academic fees have been approved by way of student referendum. What this table ultimately tells us is that campus mandatory fees consist of a wide range of functions and that no two campuses are the same. The table on the left combines campus-based fee rates from the prior slide with system tuition. Due to system-wide tuition being the same at all campuses, this table effectively indicates the change in campus-based mandatory fee rates from last year to this year. On average, there is a modest increase system-wide of $56. Increases in these fees occurred for various reasons. For example, some campuses have authorized annual incremental increases for certain fees that are tied to inflation, such as the California Consumer Price Index or Higher Education Price Index. Additionally, some student success fee increases that were programmed before the state's moratorium went into effect account for a large part of the increase at Dominguez Hills, Fullerton, Pomona, San Diego, and San Marcos. Additionally, the Student Body Center fees were increased at Monterey Bay to expand the Student Union and at Sacramento to expand the Student Union and Wellness Center. On the topic of student success fees, I'm pleased to report to you that the Chancellor's Office has developed a website for student success fee information, seen here. Website is robust and informative. This is important so that clear and timely information is available to students and their families as they financially plan for a CSU education. For example, it contains the board's policy statement and resulting state law governing the fees, information on and videos of board and workgroup discussions, and direct links to each campus's information, such as fee rates, revenues, and how campuses are putting these fees to use. The site also details the process by which a student success fee can be created, revised, and repealed. We trust that the board, the greater CSU community, and the state will find this site to be an important and useful source of information. This and other relevant information may be found at the direct link on the screen or through the calstate.edu homepage.
Ryan, I'm sorry, can you go back to the last slide with that chart? No, the one before that. Just explain this. This was not in the packet. This is a combination of tuition and category 2. Is that correct or no?
Yes, that's correct. So even the slide before that would detail out all of the various category 2 fees, and then it basically for each of those campuses it adds $54.72, which is the system-wide tuition. Sure. So if we go to slide 5, we'll be very quick with this one. I don't want to steal the thunder of my colleagues from the academic and later on in education policy. But basically, this slide provides you facts about CSU's affordability, and these statistics have been slightly updated since the board materials were published. So basically, rather than walk you through each one of these, which will happen a little bit later, I just wanted to leave you with the bottom line here, which is that the good news is about this data is that CSU is still an affordable option for all of our students and from all socioeconomic backgrounds. It is by CSU design and by a continued partnership with the state that the CSU is able to do this. So my presentation has come to an end, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ryan. Trustee Fagan?
Yeah, Ryan, I just, I was sort of involved in that student success fee experience and want to congratulate the administration and the chancellor and you and everyone that the website looks great. I went through it and it really sets things out. Do you know if there's a way to publicize it for people so they know that it's there to go to it? Is there any effort to, or mechanism to do that?
Well, we could do more if you have a
no, I'm just asking.
recommendation.
I mean, having it there is great. I mean, it really does set out all the information. I don't know how you'd let students know about it, but if there's a way to, include it in some materials or something that, with no extra cost that are being sent out automatically anyhow, it might be a good idea just to let them know it's there. But it's a good job.
One of the things that well, I'll say as a team working on this, one of the great benefits I thought was the ability to put that right on the homepage. So it's one of those immediate things that you see on the calstate.edu webpage. We also have it in the board materials here, and also when we're talking to folks in Sacramento, we also share that we have this resource as well. So we're getting the word out, but I think there's other ways that we can do it too.
Well, it was a good job. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Trustee Fagan, we have also on this website links to each of the comparable campus websites and so those are all live. And I know the presidents have paid a lot of attention to this. And so what we can do is work with the presidents. As of course, most students will come in through that campus's website, not necessarily through the system website. So we'll work with the presidents and try to determine what's the best way of making sure there's a clear communication.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Trustee Fagan. Other questions or comments from the board? Thank you again, Ryan. Just real quick, I know this is normally a kind of a pro forma annual report, but just to highlight, I jumped to that chart on page 3 of the report that showed the year-over-year increases, and your narrative that I didn't read at first adequately explained that part of the large jump at some of these campuses were because of previously approved student success fees. I guess my question there is, do we have others that are in the pipeline for next year or future years where you'll see a similar jump that have already been approved?
There are still several of those that still have a longer phase in over time. So you will see, theoretically next year when I provide this report, that you'll see those still, some of them will still be rising. In terms of actual, I think your question was about, are there more student success fees on the horizon where campuses are considering creating these? None that I'm aware of at this point.
Yeah, sorry, I apologize. I didn't mean to say that. I meant to ask, are there previously approved fees where future years will see increases? I know that. So if there's a way for you to periscope that in advance for the board, or at least for me, I'd like to see that. And then my last comment, I think your last slide was a great reminder and a great way to end, and it's in the report as well, to summarize the success. I mean, the amount of financial aid, the student debt statistics are just phenomenal. I don't know how well known that is, but it's just such a huge component of the quality of education and the value of the education for the future. So I congratulate you for finishing that presentation in that way. If there's no other questions or comments from the Committee on Finance, Mr. Chairman, that concludes our committee meeting.
Great. Thank you, Trustee Day. I'm going to go ahead and take a 5-minute recess before we call the Committee on Audit. So the Committee on Audit will convene at 2:45. Thank you.
State University Office of the Chancellor's live stream. Please adjust your audio accordingly. This is the California State University Office of the Chancellor's live stream. Please adjust your audio accordingly.